Hello there. Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are out there watching. I just want to welcome you to the Echo Valley Outpost camp meeting. My name is Roger Sleem, and I am the solar person that's going to take you through the presentation here, kind of ease your mind, get you a little bit more familiar. It's not as big as bad as you think. So with that, I will get started. I'm the type of person that likes to walk around a little, or I don't like to stand in one place, so I'm going to kind of walk around, and I'm going to kind of point to the equipment here. So before we begin, let's open with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we want to thank you for this time and this opportunity, the opportunity to learn, to grasp new ideas, new concepts, Father, for the people out there that want to know about self-sustaining country living, being self-sufficient. Father, we pray that you open our minds and our heart to receive the wisdom that you have presented here to your people. Forgive us of our sins and our shortcomings, O God. All these things we ask in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so before I begin, you're probably asking, what is this contraption here? So I'll kind of quickly take you through it, but we'll do a demonstration a little bit later when I'm done. So this is a basic setup of the equipment that generally is needed when you're doing solar. So this is known as the inverter. So this is what converts DC, direct current, to AC, alternate current. So the plugs are on the side that you plug your 110 outlet in. This is known as the charge controller that modulates the charge from the solar panel over here and regulates it and stores it into the battery right here. So the solar comes from the sun, and the sun brings down the power through the solar panels. This regulates the charge that puts it into the battery. This is connected to the battery and inverts the power from DC, because most batteries are DC, direct current. And these are the wires, and these are like fuses, and this is known as a watt meter, so you kind of know, it tells you how many watts is the battery is drawing out, the amps that you're using out of the battery. So it's just a nice indicator of the state of the battery, and you can see what how many power you have left in the battery and how to use it. And of course, the solar panels are connected to these MC4 connectors. So this is just the general, I'm hoping this doesn't fall, it should stay here. The general equipment that you're going to need when you do solar. There's just different styles, many different styles and equipment, but at the heart of it, this is what the function of it does. So now that you kind of get a gist of understand that, I'll move this out of the way so I don't fall. I want to take you to the lesson, as I call it. So people ask, what's solar power? What is it used for? So it's basically harnessing the sun and using it to produce electricity in the form of, for your water heater. You have solar water heaters on the roofs. As you drive by, you see it. It's used to heat pools, swimming pools, hot tubs. It's used to power the home, because the home uses AC, alternate current, to power the appliances and our everyday things that we use, or fridges or things like that. And of course, power the vehicles. As we know, electric vehicles is the wave of the future. And satellites and planes, believe it or not. The whole other list of things it's being used for now. So it's a very renewable energy. The sun is free. God made it free. We just have to use it wisely. So what makes up the solar power system? Like I said, you have the panels. That the proper term they give it is PV, photovoltaic, but people understand it as solar panel. A charge controller, as I pointed out, that's basically what takes the energy from the sun here and puts it into the battery. Now there are two kinds of charge controllers, and I'll go over that shortly. You have your DC inverter, which is this guy right here, that converts the power from DC to AC. And of course, your battery. And we'll kind of go through the different kinds of batteries that are out there, because a lot of people have a lot of different ideas and which battery is better than which one. We'll kind of go through that, and by today you'll be well educated on the batteries you would need that fits your budget. All right? So this is basically how it works, as I walked you through. So in a home, the panels bring in the power. The charge controller takes that power from the sun, puts it into the battery, and then your inverter then puts the power into the house. So this is generally what it entails. So you could set your own up and not have to pay the power company. I know, that's what we're all here for. We want to be self-sustaining, kind of be our own, as I call it, professional homesteader, because that's really what it's about. We were learning about gardening, what it entails, construction, things like that, because when we go this route, you're going to have to be a jack of all trade, and this is just one of them. It's like your own utility company. So you're kind of going to see how the utility company does the same thing and then sell you back the power. Why not get it for yourself? So as I said, the photovoltaic is the term, and it's used directly from the sunlight, and that's pretty much what converts it from sun to power. So now there are two different kinds of solar panels. You have the monocrystalline and you have the polycrystalline. People say, well, what's the difference? I want to take you through both of them, and then you'll pretty much can decide. The monocrystalline is a single silicon crystal, and it's typically referred to as monosolar. The polycrystalline is multiple silicon crystal fragments, and people think right away, oh, that's got to be better because it's multiple. Not so fast. Both types of solar panels have the same purpose. They convert sunlight to energy in the cells. Now, the polycrystalline is a blue color by nature. So when you see them, they look a little bit more lighter blue or bluish. That's where you can tell that's the kind of solar panel that is. As it says, they're lower efficiency compared to monocrystalline. So I'm hinting a little bit. I'm giving away some of the answers there, which means that you have more panels to reach the same power outlet. However, it has a lower price. So people always go for the lower price right away and say, hey, it's cheaper. It is cheaper. And it's more simpler to make. The monocrystalline is a little bit more expensive, but it's a little bit more efficient. It's a little bit more efficient than the polycrystalline. It's able to draw more energy into the batteries. So right away we can say which one's better, the monocrystalline. The black one is the better. Yeah, the black one is the better. It's a little bit more pricey, but you get what you pay for. So you got to decide where you want to start out. You could start out with the polycrystalline one and then eventually upgrade to the other ones. You don't have to really change out anything from that point. It's just changing out the panels. So you can start out with the cheaper one and then move to the expensive one. You can mix them, but my advice would be, if you're going to mix them, make sure that your charge controller has two PV arrays where you can take one input, so you can put the monocrystalline in one. Most charge controllers have. This one has two. So you could put one input on this side and the other input on this side. But you don't want to mix them in the array. You want to keep them separate. Because if you run the lesser one, it's going to degrade the panel to that speed or that ability. So you can mix them, but you mix them in the array. So you'll have the monocrystalline over this side and your polycrystalline over this side. So you can, in that order. So the monocrystalline is typically characterized by the black panels. Oh, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something real quick too, because a lot of people may not understand or know this, but you'll see Ampere's solar panels
Yeah.
And they're very cheap. They, the thing about them is they're selling a lot of Amphorus solar panels now. And don't get caught into the trap of buying the Amphorus just simply because they're silicone. They're not really a cell. And they are about 13 to 15% less efficient than the polycrystalline and the monocrystalline. So if you're setting up
Yeah.
a self-sustainable homestead, stay away from the Amphorus. You may be tempted into buying them because they're so cheap,
Yeah.
but they take a lot of surface,
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd throw
Well,
that
thank
out there.
you. That's true. There's so much flood in the market nowadays that you have to do your homework, and if you don't, then you're going to be left holding the bag.
Would that be the ones that they sell at Harbor Freight or something?
That one is not bad. They actually did a review on that. There's a couple guys out there on YouTube that did a review compared to some other panels, and they're not bad for the price. I mean, but they're typically 100 watt. When you're talking about power in your home, you need, this is my rule of thumb. If you have less space to put your panels, you want to go for the higher density ones, the ones that are bigger. You have the 60 cell panel, and you have the 72 cell panel. It just has that much in there, and they're typically around 6 to 6.5, but they're in the range of the 300 to 500 watt per panel. And if you're talking about space, you want to maximize your space. You want to get those kinds of panels because they're able to draw a lot of power in such a small area, depending on your area that you're going to have your system, whether on your roof or on a ground mount array or something like that. That's where you get your bang for your buck because you're going to need that power. Now, if you have space, a lot of space, you can buy those 100 watt panels all day long or those 200 watt panels all day long if you have the space available. But you're going to be in the wiring. It's going to take a lot more to wire it, and the cost in wiring keeps going up.
What about if you go to multiple, like a camper,
And a couple of, like a camper and a couple of buildings, would you use those smaller ones like separately? Like
If your camper is
Top?
mobile, yes.
Yeah.
If you're going to put it on top of the roof of the camper, yeah, you can probably use those anywhere from the 100 watt to the 275 watt panels. They can fit. You just got to do some maneuvering and make sure it goes around your AC unit or those things that you need to, on top of the camper.
Right.
But certainly you can.
okay.
Any other questions? If you don't have you can save it to the end or you can ask me, but we can go over the questions at the end in more depth if you need more answers. So. All right, so we've kind of gone through what the panels do, the function of them. I think we went over that. Oh, yes. All right, so now there are different kind of panels. So as I was stating, you have the 72 cell count. It just means that's how many cells are in there. And they're typically tall, and they're maybe 3 foot wide. And you have the 60 cell panel. They came up with the 60 cell, and they went to the 72 cell. There's no difference. Now, some of them have what's called a split. If you look at them, you'll see half divided on some of those panels. Those panels, they're called split cell. You have some panels that are bifacials. Bifacials are typically, you get the sun on one side, and the refraction of the sun rays that hit the ground or any other place, it comes in and you get the sunlight on the back side of it, and you get power as well. Those are the newer technology that they're coming up with. They're bifacials, and now with the bifacials, they have split cell. So typically on a panel, when you get a shade on a panel, that panel is dead, so to speak, because it's not getting any charge. So what they've done is they've split the cell to where if half of that, or for a portion of that solar panel gets your shade, the other part's still working, so you're getting something. So that's what the split cell really means. And it's better at resistance, because the more resistance the panels get, is the more efficient it is. So in the summer months, when the sun is baking it, you touch it, it's kind of hot to the touch. That's the resistance. The panel is fighting the heat of the sun to pull that charge into it. So in the winter months, it's better for the panels because they get that cool winter, especially if you have your panels, for people that have their panels in the northern part of the Americas, where you get your 4 seasons, the panels are the most efficient in the winter months, believe it or not. You may think on a cold day it's frigid outside, but those panels are catching those rays and converting them at a more efficient rate than in the summer. So if you have your panels, it's a good idea in the summer months to hose it down a little. It needs to breathe. It helps. So that's another thing to think about. So you have 2 kinds of cells. You have the 60 cell count and you have the 72 cell. It just means they're able to put more cells in the structure so you can get more energy. Now, there are 2 kinds of ways to wire panels. People just think you just connect them all and plug them in. Not so. There's what we call parallel wiring and series wiring. So when you wire panels in parallel, they're wired to give you more amps. Amps is the current. That's what flows through. Look at it as a body of water moving through a hose. That water flowing through the hose, that's the current. And the more amp you have, is the more current flowing through, is the faster you can charge your batteries. So be thinking about that when you do it. Now, there's a combination that you do use both of these categories to get you the right amount of voltage and amps coming through your charge control and your inverter. Those are key, but we can go in the weeds, but I'm not going to bog you down with the weeds today. We're just going to go through the general overview of what it does, and then we can discuss that after. And there is series wiring. Series means more volts. So in order to turn on an inverter, it may need a certain amount of volts to turn it on. So you may try to wire it to 12 volts, and you wonder, it doesn't come on, and you read the manual and say, hey, I need at least 18 volts. That's when you would wire your panels in series to get more volts, so it would turn on the inverter and make the charge controller work. So those are things that you have to be aware of when you are doing that. The other part is wiring in parallel. So this is basically what it is. So it takes you through what each panel has, the watts and the volts and the amps. So when, like I said, when you wire in parallels, you're increasing the amps. So if you look at that, there's 8 amps per panel, and you times that by 4, you get 32 amps. So you're able to get more charge into the batteries quicker. Go ahead.
Now, does that mean that, well, does this depend on how many volts your battery is?
Yes. So batteries, people wire them up in 12-volt series, 24-volt series, or 48. Some people go as far as 72 or 60. That's when you get into the dangerous range where if you get a shock, you may not wake up. 48 volt is a happy medium. Now I'll tell you why. Most campers are 12 volt. The reason why is because all the appliances are 12 volt. It's more efficient. But you use thicker gauge wiring, your fuses are bigger, so you have to wire and accommodate for that. But most campers are 12 volt. You don't want to wire your house in 12 volt. The reason being is because if you're high efficiency appliances, freezers, more electrical tools, things of those nature, you want to use a higher grade voltage because it can accommodate it. And in doing so, when you use a higher grade voltage, you use thinner gauge wires. So from the panels come into the charge to the batteries, you can use thinner gauge wire. If you use 12 volts, your wiring is going to be thicker, and the more thicker the wire is, the more expensive the wire is. And when you're running that, there's voltage drop for every so often as you're, so many feet. So you have to account for that. So most people go with the higher grade voltage. The ohms, yeah. The resistance is better when you go with 48 volt versus a 12 volt system. Most homes, you typically want to wire it in 48 volts. It's going to be efficient, with thinner wiring. You can run higher grade appliances, and it's just better. You can use thinner wires. So this is the wiring. So this wire is 4 or 6 gauge. So the lower the number of the wire is the thicker the wire. The higher the number is the thinner the wire. So that's what that means. So these are thicker gauge wires. It costs more money. It's more copper to make it. It's going to cost you more. So these are where you run thinner wires if you run a higher voltage system. Yeah, higher voltage system. It depends. It depends. The amps are for the current. So through that thinner gauge wire, you can still push the amps, but that wire is going to dictate how much you push through. But with solar panels, if you're pushing 30, 40 amps, that's pretty good. You're going to get a good charge into your batteries. And it depends on the wiring. So if you're using 10 gauge wire running from the solar panels into the charge control inverter, 30 amps is about all you can push through a 10 gauge wire. Any more than that, you're going to compromise that wire. That wire is going to start heating up and burning, and yeah, you want to be careful. So you have to think about those things when you're doing it. But
That wire becomes a heating element.
Exactly.
Using your electricity.
exactly, because there's more resistance going through that wire, it's not going to be as efficient. So the thicker the wire, especially between your battery and your inverter, the better, because you want that current to flow with no impedance. The thicker the wire from the from the batteries to the inverter, the better. And you want it to be close. You don't want your inverter down the road and your batteries here. You want them to be within the same proximity, within 2 or 3 feet, because that transfer of power, you want it, quick. So they make devices that include both these as one unit, and it's more efficient because when the current has to flow through here to here, there is current loss. But if you get a device that both these are in one unit, it's more efficient because the transfer is within the circuit board. My background is IT, that's where I came from. So in IT, when you design those equipment, if it's all in one, it's more efficient. It doesn't have to go through one and then come in and go through one. It's going to be less efficient. So and more expensive. You want those devices to be one unit so the transfer is instant and you don't have any current loss or degradation. So those are things to think about. And we can talk about some of the type of equipment that you can get, or what I would recommend that's better for you. So in paralleling the panels, you're getting more amps to get current into that battery as fast as you can. I've got to get used to this clicker thing here. So wiring in series now gives you more volts. As we say, more volts to run the inverter or the charge controller, because different manufacturers require different voltage to run through that equipment, and it needs that amount to at least get it started. Now they range in the voltage for that. Some of them range from at least 12 volts on up to 120 volts. But in your sizing of your panels, you have to make sure that you know what the manufacturer requires for that piece of equipment. Because if that piece of equipment says, I can only put 250 volts through it, and you put 252 or 250, 260, you're going to fry that charge controller inverter. So it's important to know the right amount of voltage. So in wiring the panel in series and parallel, it gives you the right amount of amps and the right amount of volts to put through that inverter. So it'll be efficient.
Okay, we may have to discuss it later, but
Okay?
I'm a little bit confused. It sounds like you need to be concerned about how many volts you have going to the charge controller and how many amps you have going through the converter. I mean, it sounds like you got two different things going on.
Well, both, because the manufacturers, they're the ones that dictate what goes through that piece of equipment. And they're the ones that design it. So they'll say you'll need 50 volts going through it or 100 volts going through it to make it run. They give you a range. So as you're building your panels, you have a range to play with. But you don't want to exceed that range, and you don't want to be under, because then it won't work. If you exceed it, you fry it. If you don't put enough, it won't come on, and you just have to add the right math in your panel setup to get the right amount of volts and amps coming through. It just means the current flowing through it is the right amount so it doesn't fry the equipment, and the volts running through it is the right amount so it doesn't fry the equipment. Amps and volts are different. The amps is the amount of current you're putting through that wire. The volts is the amount of energy that it requires to turn that thing on. I hope that helps. They both work hand in hand. Yes. So the amps is the current flowing through that equipment or the wire. The volts is what turns it on, the amount of volts that turns it on and keeps it running. It sounds, but you know, these are things that if you don't have a power company, you wouldn't know. It's because we're choosing to learn that now. This is what we have to learn. But once you get it, you'll understand. Go ahead.
It's kind of like water going through a hose.
Exactly.
Volts is how many feet in a second of
That one,
water can go
exactly.
through that hose. It's how fast the water is traveling. The amps is how much water can you fit in 1
Yeah.
inch of that hose. If you try to get too much water into that hose, it's going to rupture. Okay, that's what happens to the wires if you get too much current going through the wire.
Hence the heating up.
Yeah,
Hence
and
the heating
if-
up.
And water does the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Surface, the
Now,
pressure you put on
right.
water is slower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But if you make the water go faster, you can decrease the amount of size of the hose and still get as many cubic feet of
Yeah.
water through the hose as what you would have with a fatter hose.
yeah. So that's why you do 48 volt system, because you can push more. You can push the same amount or more through the thinner gauge wire if you have a higher voltage system that you build. So those are the things. It sounds like a lot, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty straightforward. You know, this is what the power company knows. We just don't know because we don't investigate. But now that you want to learn this, this is what it takes to make your electricity come into your house. You just got to know the right wire. I always say you can't go wrong if you have thicker wires. Just oversize your wires, a gauge or two, you can't go wrong, because then as you add more things in the house, you've already accounted for that, you'll be fine. But don't go exactly and say, I'm just going to get the right amount, because what's going to happen is you're not going to remember. You're going to go buy a piece of equipment, and you're going to go plug it in, and it's working, and you realize, what's burning? Bacon. I don't eat bacon. What's that? Oh, the wires. You know what I mean? So always oversize your wires. You can't go wrong. You know, if it calls for 10 gauge, which is a thicker wire, go for 8. It's thicker. You can't go wrong. If you oversize your wires, it's better to be on the safe side than the sorry side. Because when the equipment's gone, you got to replace it. What do you do? So in wiring in series, it gives you more volts. So just remember that. You get used to this thing. So now, what does a charge controller do? A charge controller basically regulates the current from the panels into the battery and make sure the battery gets the right amount, it doesn't overcharge or undercharge. Before they came up with the BMS in batteries, battery management system, people would fry their batteries or they wouldn't give it enough charge. But now batteries have a thing called a battery management system built into it. So it shuts the battery off if you get too much charge in it, or if you try to charge a battery when it's too cold, it shuts the battery off and protects it. And those are mostly found in lithium iron phosphate batteries, not in the other batteries. So that's what a charge controller does. MPP is maximum power point tracking. It does a better job of tracking the sun and bringing in the power and trickling it into the batteries at a more efficient rate. Now you have a PWM, which is pulse wave modulation, but it's 30% inefficient compared to an MPPT. So that's what most of these devices are being built with, the MPPT. So if you're thinking about a charge controller, you think of MPPT. That's the better one to get. The PWM was the first one on the market, and as technology progresses, being in IT, things change quickly. So we don't know what the next one will be, but for now, that's the one to use. So now, there's what you call an inverter. And as I talked about, an inverter is what's responsible for converting DC, direct current, to AC, alternate current. Because that's what pretty much is in everyone's household. And we can thank, well, actually, yeah, but DC is a better current. You can run higher voltage, and it's a little bit more safer than AC. AC is a little bit all over the place, and that's why it's not as efficient as DC. But because the powers that be saw that a better way to market and you can get more, they went with that. But DC is a far better. Yeah. That you can run lesser voltage, like 12 volt fridges, 12 volt AC units. But you notice they don't want to make that available because they want to sell the other ones.
Tesla was Westinghouse.
Yeah. Yep. Well, in most
Not use the battery.
well, most appliances in your house, what are they? AC, right? Not unless you're going to go buy DC, and they make it very expensive to buy the DC appliance, like a fridge. In a camper, they could be at least $7,000, is my understanding.
You can buy converters for each.
Yeah, you can. It's just, do you want to go through that? I mean, if you're willing to do that, by all means, more power to you. But most people are accustomed to the AC in the house. They buy the equipment, appliance or whatever, they plug it in, that's AC in your house, it's wired up for everything. You can wire your house for 12 volt, you just decide you want to do that. Like my house, I'm wiring, all my lighting system is 12 volt. It's more efficient, it's less draw on the battery, because when a battery has to convert, when that process has to convert from DC to AC, there's current loss, voltage, you lose current. But if you take it straight from the battery as 12 volt or DC voltage, it's more efficient, it's less draw on the battery. So, no, you don't. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the battery study. It's okay, you can ask the question. You used to have big batteries, but now you don't. Like that battery right there is lithium iron phosphate. It looks like a regular battery. And the regular battery is like probably 50 to 70 pounds or more. This is 23 pounds. 23. Lithium iron phosphate. It's 12 volt, it's 100 amp hour. So if you were to get the equivalent, yeah, it's what's in the phones. Like the batteries in your phone, that's lithium style batteries. These are a little one step further, lithium iron phosphate, where they don't burn up like the phone. Like when you go on a plane, they say you got to shut your phone off, or they don't carry that battery in the belly of the plane, because at the altitude it changes the dynamics of the battery and it will catch on fire. And that's when they develop the iron phosphate piece of it. So that,
They also require different charge and maintenance systems.
yes. So your typical lead acid battery, when you buy it and it says 100 amp hour, you're already at a disadvantage because it's actually 50 amp hour you're getting. So you can't drain that battery all the way past 50 because the battery will be no good. But a lithium, you can take it all the way down till the protection kicks in, which is at, some of them that has the built-in BMS, which is set at 25%. So the battery shuts off at that point and protects itself. Then you just charge it back up to your 100%, use it, and drain it back down. Some of them have the BMS that you can control, and you can set it to 0 and drain that battery all the way down, and it shuts off, protects itself, and bring the charge back up. It's more efficient. Lead acid batteries are 500 to 700 cycles. You'll get, that means drain, charge, drain, charge. A lithium iron phosphate can get you anywhere from 5 to 10,000 cycles. So people say, well, yeah, they're expensive. 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I'd say yes. But now they're a 1.5 to 1 ratio. So you see the price is coming even to where lithium iron phosphate is very affordable.
Consider the charge cycles.
Yeah. And
Do the lithium ions tend to build a memory like the lead acid?
what do you mean build memory?
If you take a lead acid and say you never charge it above 70%, you don't ever bring it up full, it will actually at a point begin to think 70% of
No.
its capacity is full.
Lithium doesn't do that. Lithium iron phosphate doesn't do that. You use it, you can set the charge parameters however you want. It doesn't have memory. It just charges to 100%. Or if you say you keep it at 80%, that way you don't drop it below 80%. Or if you want to charge at 80 and top off, the experts say keeping your battery charged between 80 and 25% gives it a good life cycle for lithium. But I've seen people keep it 100, drain it to 0, 100, and still get the 5,000 to 10,000 cycles out of that battery. And even when a battery, like you see a lot of people using the batteries from Tesla cars or Leafs, those things, when they sell them on the market, they're at a 60% capacity, not 100, and they're still efficient. You still can get a lot of life out of it because of the application that you're using. Some people use it for cabins or even off-grid cabins or even their shed or their water pump or sailboats, and they're just as efficient as if it was 100 because battery, when you put it in a car, the car demands a lot because it's stop and start on that battery. That's one of the best ways to exhaust a battery. So if it can make it through the car battery, it sure can do what you need to do in your shed or your house or whatever. Just, Keep charging it. It'll last a long time. So as I was saying, this is a piece of equipment that's responsible from DC to AC. The battery is basically where the energy gets stored. This is where your electricity sits. So this is where the energy gets stored. When all that's said and done, you're putting it into battery because why? You want to have it at night. That's when the battery comes into play, at night. Your panels work in the daytime, and if it's finished charging the batteries and you need current, it's going to pull it straight from there, invert it, and send the power straight to your outlet. Doesn't even touch the battery. The battery is pretty much at nighttime when you need the energy. You need to run your appliance and stuff. That's what the battery comes in for. You had a hand up?
Yeah. On the lead acid batteries, I've read that when you're discharging it, you don't want to exceed a rate. Say it's a 100 amp hour battery, you want to make that 100 amp hours last over 2 hours, so you wouldn't want to put more than a 50 amp load on it. Is that also true with the lithium batteries?
No. Most of these batteries are rated for 100 amp discharge current. You could discharge it at 100 amp. Doesn't bother it.
Okay.
Okay, so my understanding about the other type of batteries you were talking about.
Lead acid batteries?
Yeah. They have cells.
Correct.
My understanding that you have to fill or you have to.
Those are the flooded lead acid
flooded,
batteries. But you
okay.
have sealed lead acid batteries or AGM or gel.
Yes.
They don't need to be maintained. They're sealed.
I understand they don't do those anymore.
Some
The
people
gel?
still have the gel, they still have them. But they're going to the AGM sealed batteries or flooded. That's the typical two on the market right now. But
So
we're going to go
What do you
through.
have to do with those? With the lithium?
That's a lithium iron phosphate batteries. It doesn't need any maintenance. It doesn't need to be vented. You don't need to put a billet box and put like a tube to vent it
Really?
outside. You put those in your house.
Alrighty then.
It's more efficient.
No wonder
That's
they
where
cost so much
everything is going. So an analogy, the typical old style flood lead acid batteries, you used to have distilled water, you have to have a meat thing, you have to measure, you have to top it off properly. That's the old style of doing things. Now they still sell them because there's still people that want those batteries. The reason why some people say is because these are not EMP proof, but that's not the case. EMP, like if a electromagnetic pulse goes off, anything electronic just goes dead. So they're saying that because that has a BMS in there, it'll go dead. But you can build them without it and still use it because these devices have what's called a BMS built in to where you can set the float rate, the absorption rate of the battery, and it won't exceed that or drop below that setting. So these have that ability, but you know, at an EMP, if an EMP goes off, I don't think you'll be worried about electricity at that point. You're worried about, do I have enough food? Do I have enough water? And where I'm at, is it safe? That's what you're going to be worried about. You're not going to be worried about that, but that's the cliche that people say. That's why they go with lead acid batteries, because they don't have to worry about that. But you have all the other things you have to worry about. Maintenance, venting, where if you breathe in that gas, you may not wake up. So I'll take my chances with that versus the other. It's just less maintenance. When you have a homestead and you're a professional homesteader, your time is allotted at different things, and you can't, you know, spend a lot of time with, have to maintain something that then at that point becomes cumbersome and it's not worth it. You might as well have your wood cook stove and your kerosene lamp and wait till Jesus comes. Go ahead.
What's the
Joyce.
typical price in a battery like that now?
This one is about 350. I've seen them as cheap as 300. I've seen them cheaper, but you want to be careful. Yeah, so you want to be careful because you don't want to buy, because there's so much batteries coming from China that's flooding the market and they're not that good. We can talk about different name brands that are good at the end, but this is a good one. It's called Ampere. It's 350, I think I paid for it. And people say, well, you could put 4 of those together, get your series, and have your 48 volt system. And you can start out with a 100 amp hour or 48 volt system for less, probably about $1,200. And you have a 48 volt system, lithium iron phosphate batteries that's efficient. So don't think you can't get there, you can. It's not bad at all. And some people will buy 8 parallel them, and instead of it being 100 amp hour, it'll be 200 amp hour. These come in 12 volt, 300 amp hour. So if you get 4 of these together, remember, parallel them, you increase the amps increase. So it'll be, if you get 4 of these and you want a 48 volt system, you wire them in series, you'll get 300 amp hour. So the more amp hour, so the amp hour is the capacity of the battery. 1,000 watts is typically 1 amp hour, one hour of amp, 1 hour of power. So if this typically is 1,280 watt hours. So it depends on the appliance you're running. If you're running something, and most people when they install these things, they have a meter. So it tells you you have 3 hours running at 1,000 watts per hour. If you're running something that's 10 watts or 100 watts, you have 10 hours. You know what I mean? So it's whatever appliance that you're running at that watt hour that you're using dictates how much juice that battery is going to hold. But the measurement is typically 100 amp hour. So they figure, 1,280 watt hours is, the medium that people run, whatever they're running at. So if you run at 100 amp hour, you have 10 amp, maybe 12 hours of runtime through that battery for whatever you're running, whether it's your electric kettle, your hair dryer. Go ahead.
Like, could you give an example, like for the day, if I was running a blender, a food processor, plus my refrigerator is on, and how can you give an example, like how many appliances and?
So each of those, those toasters and electric kettles and things, they run anywhere from 700 to 1,200 watts as it's running there for however long you're cooking it with. So if you're running the microwave, it's typically 8 to 1,000 watts. That's for 5 minutes or 20 minutes. So if you're talking about running all those appliances, the average that I've seen that people need for the battery capacity is 300 to 500 amp hours of battery running those type of equipments. Now, mind you, when you're running these things, you want to design your system where your batteries charge at about 4 to 4.5 hours based on the winter. So if your system charges there, then your battery is good, then all the other power you're using is straight from the panels. You're not touching the battery. So you want to design your system, because I always tell people, don't measure all the appliances I'm running and can that battery work. Measure it based on, if I run my equipment at night, will it last till the morning? Well, most people, I tell them, do all your heavy lifting in the daytime when you have the sun. So if you're using it, the batteries can be charged back by the end of the sun cycle. So that's how you measure it, because you can't really measure it because people use different things at different times and they draw different voltage and different watts. But you just remember this, when we're coming to the country, we're not trying to keep living like we're in the city, because it's not our power grid. You have your own. So if you think like that, you want to put your fridges on timers, freezers on timers, because a freezer doesn't draw that much, especially when you're looking at a fridge. You want to buy fridges and freezers where they draw 1 to 3 amp hour, because every amps times volts give you watts. So if your fridge draws 1 amp and the fridge typically runs between 115 to 120 volts, when that fridge works, it's only at 120 watts. 115 to 120 watts. So as the amps start going up, times the volts, that's how many watts you're going to be burning. So be thinking when you're buying a fridge or a microwave or a toaster oven, find out the amps, because you're plugging it into a 110 outlet or a 120. But amps are important, because when you times the amps, volts times volts, that's how many watts you're going to burn, because most of the time they don't tell you how many watts, or you don't really know. That's how you know how many watts you're going to burn. So if you can know how many watts you're going to burn per hour, like on a computer, like for instance, my laptop here, on the little brick there, it says 65 watts. So it burns 65 watts per hour as I'm using it. So that's, if you know how many amps or watts you're going to be using in any appliance, you can pretty much size your system to accommodate for that. But I always tell them, size your system based on how many watts you're going to use at nighttime, because that's when you need the battery, not during the day. Now, if you design your system inefficient and it's always drawing in the battery during the daytime, yeah, you're going to burn out your battery and you're going to have to get a generator to help keep it charged. But if you size it properly, you'll never have that problem, because you're going to always use the power coming straight from the panels instead of what's coming from the batteries, because if you size it properly, it's going to top off the batteries. The batteries are going to be nice and ready. So everything you use after that is straight from the panels, straight to the outlet. Does that make sense? So the type of batteries that we're going to go through the different kind of batteries that you're going to be looking at. So the batteries out there, there are roughly 4 types. There is the lead acid, and it falls under AGM, gel, and flooded. You have your lithium batteries that are what I have right there, lithium iron phosphate. You have your redox flow batteries, and you have your hydrogen batteries. So your flooded batteries are typically cars. Most cars have them. You open up you have to top it off with water. Forklift batteries, those kinds of batteries, they still use them today. There's nothing wrong with them. They do what they do. They've been tried and proven over the decades. But with time and more research, better batteries come out. And you want to take advantage of it. Go ahead. Now these are still in the, only big companies use them, but they're very efficient. But it takes more. Just with any new technology, they have to try and get it down to where it's affordable. But that used to be where those guys used to be. Used to be big. And used to be dangerous. But they've become down to be, they're making more efficient, and they're more available to the public, to the consumer. And with demand, prices always goes down. So the gel batteries are typically maintenance free, as I told you. I didn't bring one, but if you open up like a UPS unit, you buy those uninterrupted power supplies for your computer or whatever. When you open those up, those are the gel batteries or the AGM batteries that are sealed, and you don't have to worry about maintaining them or doing anything. But when they go dead, they're dead. But some people, you can pop the lid and you can put back distilled water in there and you recharge them and they'll work again. Well, a lot of people don't know that. They just get rid of them or recycle. But that's what the companies do. When you recycle it, you've just saved them a lot of money. They just do what I'm telling you. They just have more sophisticated equipment, but they open them back up, put the right amount of fluid in them, and charge them and then turn around and sell them back to you. Well, people don't know that. It's people in the third world countries that do that. They figured it out. But we're in a modern society. We don't have time for that. We just recycle it, buy a new one, and just keep going. We're consumer-based. The AGM is the same kind. They're just glass matted inside. But they both do the same, the gel and the AGM. That's the newer flood, or that's replacing the flooded batteries. And they don't have to be vented. You can put them in your house, but they're at the same thing, only 50%. You can't drain it below 50%. So.
Is that why the cell phones are invented now without a battery thing to open up?
Yeah, so when you charge them, they work. You just charge them, discharge them, charge them, discharge them. The life of the battery, the chances of you keeping that phone till you pass 7,000 or 10,000 cycles is highly unlikely, because, a new phone come out, the new model, let's buy it, and you just upgrade. But they recycle those phone batteries. I've seen guys that took those batteries out and they make a whole pack and they power their houses with it. So yeah, people use them because they still have life in them. Yeah, lithium. So the most popular one is the lithium iron phosphate. They came up with that technology in the 80s and the 90s. It's maintenance free. It's much faster charging and discharging than the lead acid batteries. The lithium titanium oxide, it's a third type of lithium, but you see the cycles? 30,000 cycles. Those things will last for a decade. I mean, a half a century. Probably a century if you use it wisely. They last for more than 10 years. your flow batteries. It was invented in Australia. And when I get to the comparison at the end, you're going to see what they look like. But they require electrochemical storage systems. So you have these huge tanks. And typically you have one on one side and one on the other side, and they fill them with that liquid. And when they have a membrane that they cross through. When they cross through, that's where the magic happens, and that's where the energy comes through. But you know, they're in the beginning stage, so it takes bigger companies to use them, and they do use them because it's efficient. And like I said, the charge on these things, they can charge and discharge very quickly, but you know, the average Joe can't afford that yet. You know, I'm hoping God comes before they develop that technology, because I want to go home.
Okay.
Of course, we know hydrogen batteries because they're in the cars now. They have them in buses. You see them in the buses. Mostly in Europe. America is starting to adopt that technology, but if you go to Europe, they're in those buses that travel all along and carry people. They're very efficient, but you know, it takes a lot to maintain it. You know, to set it up in your house takes a lot. You had a question?
Yeah, I noticed that you don't have a generator as part of your system. Why is that?
We can talk about that. If I had to lug a generator in here and set up all that, but you can. So your generator, and we'll talk about it a bit more. It's where on cloudy days, because we do get them, the generator acts like the sun. So it's another method of charging the batteries, because the goal is to charge the batteries, right? Because that's where the energy is stored. So you can have a generator where if the sun doesn't charge the batteries, the system can tell the batteries to kick on and charge the batteries while feeding the house, the generator, while feeding the house with the electricity as well. So that's another method that people do, and that's something that we can talk about more offline. In designing your system, you want to have your generator as another method of charging, just like you have a rain catchment system for getting water, or the well, or a cistern, or things like that. So you have different methods of charging the battery. So the types of batteries, so your flooded batteries, your AGMs, there's the pros. They're cheap, they support higher load, resistance to cold weather. That used to be, but not now, because now you have these things that have BMSs in them. They're maintenance free, as I say, and they're safe, but the cons, they degrade if overcharged. You don't want to do that. They're heavy. The life duration is 50%. So like I said, when you buy something that's 100 amp hour, it's really 50 amp hour you're buying. It's almost like when you buy those, when I buy my cereal box and I open it up and it's at half, I'm like, and that's okay. But we've become accustomed to it, so they say, hey, let's do it with batteries, I guess. Does not support quick charging. It takes a while to charge them, because that's just how, the process of that technology, that's how it works. You can't do anything more than that. It's a low tolerance to intermittent charging. That means charge it, stop, use it, and then don't charge it back to the full. It doesn't work that well. I mean, it's not. Your gel batteries, it's along the same lines as the AGM. I'll let you get your picture. I know you. Now your lithium, it's a higher storage capacity, as it shows there. Filtered intermittent charge, that means it handles great. So if you're charging it and you, for some reason the clouds came out and it didn't charge back to 100%, you have 75%, you can run it like you normally would. It won't affect the battery. You can drain it back down to zero and start back over. That's the beauty about it. High output, very durable. It accepts quick charge. It's very light. And the temperature toleration is very good, because now, like I said, they have the BMS, so it's very efficient. As you can see, there's not much cons to it anymore. People, the expensive is gone, because, like I said, there's a ratio of 1 to 1.5, so more people are going that route. These are the LTO batteries. Now, I've seen that they're starting to make their way out there. There's a lot of people making videos about using them. They haven't caught on yet. But more people are using them. As you can see, high temperature tolerance. It's very safe. The charge cycles is very good, but they're very expensive. That's why they haven't, and they're a little bit heavy. But I'd rather have a battery heavy that can do that than a typical lead acid batteries that it's at 50% capacity already. So here's the other one I was telling you, the red ox. Those are those big containers, and that's how they're pretty much set up for. They're tall, man. They're tall. They're about maybe this tall, maybe that big. And of course, there's a hydrogen battery that is extremely durable. A lot of Europe have made that conversion. Most, bus companies use them. Railroad system. I mean, what are they? Those they use like the garbage trucks that come around in Europe to pick up stuff. They run on these things a lot. As you can see, the only thing is just heavy and cost. But other than that, it's pretty efficient. Now, this is a cost for storage. So as you can see, the cost per kilowatt hours. People think, oh, the expensive, but when you're talking about the kilowatt hours that you use, you can see these are very efficient. The other two is the hydrogen and the lithium. That's why most people are going this route. Your gel, your AGM, the cost is expensive. So you're thinking, oh, it's costly when you buy it, but actually when you're using it, that's where the cost is. That's where you save the money. This is where it's more efficient. So it's like, to me, it's a no-brainer now that it's affordable, and while it's still available, for the consumer, your lithium iron phosphate is your better route because you can get more out of it, and it'll last a long time. Now, let me go forward. So there's my contact information, and now what I'm going to do is, I guess I could do it right here, or we could go outside and I can take the panels, connect it, and connect the batteries, and you can kind of see what it's doing, and we can plug in something and you can see, wow, I'm getting my power for free. This is great. So I will leave that information. Does anybody have any questions? Any more questions? I can answer them now if you have any other questions or concerns, or go ahead.
Okay, I have a camper van. It's got about, I think it's 4 batteries.
Probably 12 volts each, right? I'm assuming it's 12 volt in series, probably.
Probably.
Actually,
I think
no, in
it's
parallel to
series.
get.
But yeah, and I'm wondering, can I change those batteries over pretty easily
You can.
to something like that? But
You can. Now I know your camper has like a shore power thing, right?
what's that?
What's that? Like when you go to the campground and you plug in the twist lock 30 amp circuit
I do.
to power the things.
Yeah.
So a couple things you'd have to be mindful of when you're changing out from your typical lead acid batteries or AGM batteries to that. You want to make sure that you may have to do some rewiring in there, because that connection that comes in, it powers certain equipment, and in moving to the lithium, you want to make sure that it can accommodate it. I've seen people move all their like 110 outlets to the lithium, and they leave the AC on the shore power because that can't really power. You need a 48 volt system, and if you're going with a 12 volt, it won't have enough juice to power the AC unit because of the circuit breaker, 30 amps. It draws a little current, so people just use that, and they use the lithium to power everything else. But it may not be because I don't know how old your camper is.
Oh, 2004.
Oh, well, yeah, you shouldn't have a problem making that transition. Newer ones do, but the older ones should be able to make that transition, and you just remove the lead acid batteries, put the lithium, and it should power them up with no issue. Go ahead.
So basically, the reason the inverter has to change DC to. So the reason that you have an inverter that changes DC to AC, is it because DC is too powerful for any device to use, it'll just fry the battery?
No, it's because of the industry. It's already set that to where most houses are AC wired. And in order to convert the sun, because solar and the battery is DC, it's direct current, because you're getting it directly from the sun, and then it goes directly from the panel to the battery. There is no producing it, it's there. So that's what DC means, it's direct current. But most appliances in the house across North America, it's wired in AC, so that's why you have to convert the power from DC to AC. But DC is more efficient, and you're a little bit safer with DC than AC, because I can touch that with my hand and I don't get shocked. But AC, if you touch the circuit, you complete it, you're going to get shocked. So DC is a more safer current, but you can get it, but as the voltage goes higher. But it's just a more efficient, but because the industry has set the tone, we just have to abide by it. Go ahead.
I will say, if you're looking for an inverter, spend the money to get a pure sine wave inverter.
Correct.
The cheap ones have what they call a modified sine wave, and not everything will work with it.
Your electronics, your sensitive electronics, computers, phones, and things like that will have issues with inverters that are not pure sine wave. You want, if you run it through oscilloscope, you'll see the power is like, it's not clean.
Yeah.
Pure sine wave, the power has a nice symmetrical loop that doesn't affect. When they're like jittery like that and stuff, they'll damage your equipment.
Are you saying sine wave or sine?
Sine, S-I-N-E is the term. The wave,
Yeah.
as in wave.
Yeah, like
W-A-V-E.
a wave of the ocean.
Yeah, so your modified inverters, or you don't want to buy those. You want to buy the ones that says pure sine wave. If it doesn't say it on it, don't buy it. Make sure it says pure. If it don't say pure, don't buy it.
I thought that direct current would shock you worse than the alternate current.
That was the argument they made back in the days with Tesla and Westinghouse and the other companies. That,
That they had a horse that they'd had for 9 years, and they were moving here, and they didn't quite have the fence complete with the alternate current. And so they just did direct current. The horse got into it and died because it couldn't get away from it. It just
well, anything, if you get stuck in there and you can't get out, eventually it's going to take its toll. But direct current is a little bit more forgiving than AC current. Yeah, typically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was the other thing that ramped up.
Yeah. Yeah, to be able to everybody move to AC.
I think it depends on the voltage.
Yeah, the
involved.
voltage that you're putting through that thing. It's, remember, voltage is voltage, whether DC or AC. But it depends how much voltage was going through that fence at the time.
But here's the thing. The alternating current is going to be on and then off.
Exactly.
On and then off. And if the voltage is high enough to cause a problem with the DC, with the AC, it'll be on and then off and have a tendency to kick the horse away from the fence.
Yeah.
Whereas the DC
Is a,
will,
will,
but if you get the voltage low enough that you're not dealing with that problem,
yeah.
then it won't.
Because when you touch it, DC, if it's low enough, you're going to start feeling a warm sensation, and pretty soon you're like, wait, it's something different. You have an opportunity. But with a DC, AC, if you touch it and it hits you and it's coming at you on and it's a lot, it's going to. But some of the time, like I always, this is how I always check. If I'm touching something and I turn off the breaker and I'm making sure, I do backhand because this is the natural reflection of the muscle. But if you do this, the natural, it's going to grab you. You can't get off. I mean, I remember one time I was back home, or I was growing up, and this one guy touched this thing and he could not move, and then the guy had to basically tackle him and knock him from it because he was, the muscle is contracting. This is always contracting. So it's a good idea to be opposite of the muscle because your natural reflexes is, yeah. So just go ahead.
I worked with telephone equipment for a year or so when I was in high school, and the ringtone is about 20 volts at 20 cycles. What's in your wall is 110,
At
120
60.
volts at 60,
60 cycles.
The 20 cycles is more closely tuned to your human body frequencies. And at that, even at that smaller voltage, if you crossed your fingers across it when the telephone ring was coming through, you could be in trouble.
You'd feel it. Europe,
It could kick you hard.
Europe's electrical system, they use the 240 volt at 50 hertz, where we do 120, 240 at 60 hertz. Why we do, I don't know, but I think the lower that hertz is the better, because you have some, you have some time to play with it. But when it's higher, yeah, better.
Yeah.
So if there are no more questions, I'll take this outside and I'll hook it up and you can see how everything works. You can plug in something. Huh? Yeah, somebody, I guess my brother can help me. Somebody, or Christian, Daniel, come here. Oh, go ahead. You have one last question? Yeah. No. H. It was something with an A or something. What was it? No. Different. Yeah, there's Pano. There's. Yeah. It's a brand. Yeah. But they're using a different type of material to make it that's not good, and then they call it monocrystalline or polycrystalline. It's the type of material that they're making. It looks like one of those two, but it's not. It's a type of material. I believe it begins with an A. I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah.